Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The shackles were cold, but the Emperor's laughter was colder, slicing through the humid air of the throne room like a rusted blade. Look at him. Emperor Varys sneered, kicking Julian's ribs with the toe of his gold-plated boot, sending a jolt of agony through the former Grand Scribe's body. Once the voice of reason in my court, now just a trembling spaniel. I have no use for a scholar who cannot learn his place. Varys turned his gaze toward the shadows where the immense, armored figure of General Kaelin stood like a statue carved from obsidian. Take him, Kaelin. Consider him a bonus for your victory in the West. He's soft, spoiled, and breaks easily. Use him until he shatters. Then throw the pieces to your hounds. The court tittered, a sound like dry leaves skittering over a grave. Julian pressed his forehead against the marble floor, the biting chill seeping into his skin. He was the last heir of House Valera, a lineage of scholars and advisors, now reduced to a parting gift for the Empire's most ruthless butcher. He waited for the rough hands, for the drag of chains, for the end of his dignity. As you command, Your Majesty. The voice was a deep, subterranean rumble that vibrated in Julian's chest. Heavy boots approached. Julian squeezed his eyes shut. A hand, calloused and large enough to crush his skull, gripped the back of his collar. He was hauled upright not with malice, but with a terrifying, indifferent efficiency. For a fleeting second, Julian stared into eyes the color of stormy seas, General Kaelin's eyes. There was no lust in them, no cruelty. Only a void. He is mine now? Kaelin asked, his tone flat. Yours to break. Varys grinned, swirling his goblet of wine. A joke, Kaelin. To remind you that even the highest pedigree means nothing if it does not bite. Kaelin didn't smile. He didn't bow. He simply turned, dragging Julian behind him like a sack of grain. Then I will take my leave. As they exited the golden warmth of the palace into the biting night air, Julian stumbled. He expected a blow. Instead, the general stopped. He didn't help Julian up, but he didn't strike him. He merely waited, a mountain of black steel and wolf fur against the moonlight. If you fall again, Kaelin said, his voice low and devoid of the Emperor's theatrics, I will carry you. And I do not think you want to be carried like a bride in front of my men. Julian scrambled to his feet, his breath hitching. The game had begun, but the rules were already different than he had feared. The journey to the northern fortress took 2 weeks of grueling travel. Julian, stripped of his silks and dressed in rough-spun wool that scratched his skin raw, rode in the back of a supply wagon. He was ignored by the soldiers, likely under orders, and ignored by the general, who rode at the vanguard on a massive warhorse. Julian's mind, however, was not idle. He had not survived the purge of his family by being foolish. He analyzed the general from afar. Kaelin was a man of few words. He ate the same rations as his men. He slept in a tent, not a carriage. The Emperor called him a dog, a brute force weapon, but Julian saw the way Kaelin scanned the horizon, calculating, precise. He wasn't a dog. He was a wolf waiting for the winter to thin the herd. When they finally arrived at the fortress of Iron Crag, the wind was a physical assault. Snow swirled in violent eddies. The fortress was a brutalist structure of gray stone jutting out of the mountain, a stark contrast to the opulence of the capital. Julian was taken not to the dungeons, but to the general's private quarters. It was a spacious, Spartan room dominated by a large tactical table covered in maps and a massive fur-covered bed. A fire roared in the hearth, the only source of mercy in this frozen hell. The door opened, and Kaelin entered. He had removed his heavy plate armor, wearing only a black tunic that clung to his broad shoulders. He looked at Julian, who was standing awkwardly by the fire, shivering despite the heat. Sit, Kaelin commanded, pointing to a chair. Julian sat, his hands gripping his knees. Are you going to kill me tonight? Julian asked, his voice trembling slightly, but his chin held high. Or is the torture scheduled for the morning? Kaelin walked to a sideboard and poured 2 cups of strong-smelling wine. He placed one before Julian. Drink. I asked you a question, and I gave you an order, Kaelin replied, his eyes narrowing. Drink. You are pale, and if you die of a fever, the Emperor will think I am incompetent at keeping my toys alive. Julian hesitated, then took the cup. The wine burned his throat, but the warmth was welcome. Kalen leaned against the heavy oak table, crossing his arms. The muscles in his forearms shifted like coiling snakes. Varys thinks you are a spy, Kalen said bluntly. Julian almost choked. I was his scribe. I catalogued his taxes. I am not a spy. You are a Valera. Your family questioned his legitimacy 3 decades ago. He kept you close to watch you, and now he is tired of watching. He gave you to me because he believes I am too stupid to see a knife in the dark, or too loyal to care. Kalen took a slow sip of his wine. He expects me to break you. To humiliate you so thoroughly that any secrets you hold become the ramblings of a madman. And will you? Julian whispered. Kalen set his cup down. He moved closer, towering over Julian. He reached out, his hand hovering near Julian's face. Julian flinched, turning his head away. Kalen's fingers, rough and warm, brushed a stray lock of hair from Julian's forehead. The touch was electric, confusing. I do not break things that have value, Kalen murmured. But until I decide what value you have, you will stay in this room. You will not speak to the soldiers. You will not write. You will be a ghost. A prisoner, Julian corrected. A guest who cannot leave, Kalen corrected back. Sleep. The floor is cold, take the bed. I have work to do. You're taking the floor? Julian asked, incredulous. Kalen looked at him, a flicker of amusement crossing his stoic face. I am a soldier, Julian. I have slept in mud, blood, and snow. A rug by the fire is a luxury. Weeks bled into a month. The dynamic was strange, suffocating, and confusing. Julian was indeed a prisoner in the room, but he was fed well. Kalen spoke little, but he listened. When Kalen worked late into the night on his tactical maps, Julian would watch him. One evening, frustration got the better of Julian. He walked over to the table where Kalen was frowning at a map of the western supply lines. You're routing the grain through the valley, Julian said, his voice cutting the silence. That's suicide in winter. The avalanches will bury half your convoy. Kalen looked up, his expression unreadable. And what would a court scribe know of supply lines? I read the geological surveys of this region 10 years ago. Julian snapped, grabbing a charcoal stick. The snowpack is unstable here, and here. He marked 3 crosses on the map. You need to take the winding path through the cliffs. It adds 2 days, but you won't lose your food. Kalen stared at the map, then at Julian. For a long, tense minute, silence reigned. Julian felt a spike of fear. He had overstepped. He had corrected the general. Why? Kalen asked softly. Why what? Why help me? You should want my men to starve. You should want the empire to fall. Julian lowered the charcoal. I want Varys to fall, he said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. But the soldiers, they are just men. And if this fortress falls, the barbarians from the wastes will slaughter the villages behind us. My sister lives in one of those villages. Kalen stood up slowly. He walked around the table until he was inches from Julian. The heat radiating from the general was overwhelming. You are not the soft thing Varys described, Kalen said. And you are not the mindless dog he thinks you are, Julian countered, meeting his gaze. Kalen's hand shot out, grabbing Julian's wrist. It wasn't painful, but it was firm. He pulled Julian closer, reducing the space between them to nothing. Julian could smell the leather, the soap, and the distinct, masculine scent of the man. Be careful, scribe, Kalen whispered, his voice dropping an octave. Intelligence is dangerous here. If Varys knew you were useful, he would have had your tongue cut out before sending you to me. Then let's hope he doesn't find out, Julian breathed. For a moment, the air was charged with something thicker than tension. Kalen's thumb brushed the inside of Julian's wrist, feeling the frantic pulse there. It was a moment of intimacy that terrified Julian more than the violence he had expected. Then, Kalen released him and stepped back. Go to sleep. We rout through the cliffs at dawn. The peace, fragile as it was, shattered 2 weeks later. An imperial delegation arrived unannounced. Julian was reading a book by the fire when the door burst open. Kalen entered, looking furious, followed by a slim, oily man in purple robes. Lord Silas, the Emperor's new favorite. General, really, Silas drawled, looking around the room with disdain. The Emperor hears rumors. He hears that his gift is being treated like a guest. No bruises, no chains, It makes one wonder if the general has gone soft. Julian stood, his heart hammering against his ribs. Silas looked at him like a hawk eyeing a field mouse. He serves his purpose, Kalen gritted out. Does he? Silas stepped forward, a riding crop in his hand. He reached out and lifted Julian's chin with the tip of the crop. He looks healthy. Too healthy. Varys wants to know if the dog has forgotten how to bite. Silas raised the crop and slashed it across Julian's face. The sting was immediate and blinding. A red welt bloomed across Julian's cheek. He cried out, stumbling back. There, Silas smiled. That looks more like it. The air in the room dropped 20 degrees. Silas, Kalen said. The word was not a question. It was a death sentence. Oh, come now, General. Don't tell me you care for the trash. Silas turned to strike again. Before the crop could fall, a hand caught Silas's wrist. Kalen didn't just hold it. He squeezed. There was a sickening crunch of small bones grinding together. Silas screamed, dropping the crop. You are in my fortress, Kalen snarled, twisting the arm until Silas was forced to his knees. You are under my protection as an envoy, but accidents happen in the north. People slip. People fall from walls. You dare touch me. Silas shrieked, clutching his broken wrist as Kalen shoved him away. The Emperor will hear of this. You protect a traitor. I protect my property, Kalen roared, his voice shaking the stone walls. He stepped between Silas and Julian, a wall of pure aggression. Tell Varys that if he wants his toy broken, he can come up here and do it himself. But while the boy is mine, no one touches him. Now get out before I decide the wolves need feeding. Silas scrambled back, pale and sweating. You've sealed your fate, Kalen. He will burn this fortress to the ground. Let him try. Silas fled. The door slammed shut. Silence returned, heavy and blood-soaked. Julian held his cheek, his eyes wide. Kalen stood facing the door, his chest heaving. Slowly, the general turned. The rage in his eyes vanished the moment they landed on Julian. Let me see, Kalen said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He walked over and tilted Julian's head to the light. His fingers, which had just crushed a man's wrist, were featherlight against Julian's jaw. It will bruise, Kalen murmured. I'm sorry. You just threatened the Emperor's proxy, Julian whispered, shock numbing the pain. He will declare you a traitor. He was going to do that eventually, Kalen said, walking to a basin of water and wetting a cloth. He returned and dabbed at the welt on Julian's face. The cool water stung, but Kalen's focused expression was a balm. Varys fears me. He fears the loyalty of the Northern Army. Giving you to me was a test. If I killed you, I was a monster he could use. If I kept you, I was a rebel he needed to destroy. So you saved me, knowing it would start a war. Kalen paused. He looked deep into Julian's eyes. I didn't save you for politics, Julian. Then why? Kalen didn't answer with words. He dropped the cloth. His hand cooped Julian's uninjured cheek, his thumb tracing the line of his lip. The distance between them closed. It was a slow, deliberate gravity. When Kalen kissed him, it wasn't the kiss of a conqueror. It was desperate, searing, and possessive. It tasted of wine and danger. Julian froze for a heartbeat, then melted. He grabbed Kalen's tunic, pulling him closer, anchoring himself in the storm. This man, this terrifying Iron Wolf, was the only safe place left in the world. Kalen pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against Julian's. Because you are the only one in this cursed empire who looks at me and sees a man, not a weapon. They will come for us, Julian whispered, his hands trembling on Kalen's chest. Let them, Kalen growled, his arms wrapping around Julian's waist, pulling him flush against his hard body. Let Varys come. I have the Northern Army. I have the fortress. And I have the smartest man in the empire to help me plan the war. Julian managed a weak, watery smile. I assume I'm getting a promotion from prisoner to strategist? You're getting a promotion to partner, Kalen corrected, kissing the corner of Julian's mouth. And if we survive the winter, perhaps something more. The war did not start with trumpets. It started with silence. The supplies from the capital stopped. Assassins came in the night, only to be found at dawn, their bodies displayed on the ramparts. Julian worked tirelessly. He organized the grain distribution, ensuring the fortress could last through a siege. He wrote letters to the minor lords who had been scorned by Varys, weaving a web of alliances that Kalen, for all his martial prowess, could never have managed. Calon, in turn, trained the men. He turned the garrison into a fanatic legion loyal not to the crown, but to the general and his scribe. But the real battle was fought in the quiet moments. In the late hours when the maps were rolled away and the fire burned low. "You're staring again," Julian murmured one night, looking up from a scroll. Calon was sharpening his sword, the rhythmic shink-shink filling the room. "I am memorizing you." "Why?" "In case I go blind in the next battle," Calon said deadpan. Julian laughed, a genuine sound that surprised them both. "You are terrible at romance, General." Calon set the sword down. He stood and walked to Julian, lifting him out of the chair as easily as if he were a doll. He sat down and placed Julian in his lap. The position was vulnerable, exposing, yet Julian felt like a king on a throne. "I am a quick learner," Calon rumbled, nuzzling the sensitive spot behind Julian's ear. "Teach me." "First lesson," Julian breathed, tilting his head back. "Never underestimate the power of a gentle touch." Calon's hand slid under Julian's tunic, warm skin against warm skin. "Like this?" "Yes." "And the second lesson?" Julian turned in his lap, straddling him, looking down into those stormy eyes that were now clear and bright. "Second lesson. Never let your enemy know what you truly value, because they will try to destroy it." Calon's grip tightened on Julian's hips. "They can try, but the wolf does not give up his mate. Not to an emperor. Not to God." The term sent a shiver down Julian's spine. Mate, it was primal. It was permanent. 6 months later, the emperor's army arrived. 10,000 men in golden armor, a shining sea of death against the white snow. Varys himself rode at the front, confident in his numbers. Standing on the high walls of Iron Crag, Calon looked down at the host. He wore his full armor, black plate etched with silver wolves. Beside him stood Julian, wrapped in white furs, looking not like a prisoner, but like a northern prince. "He thinks we are afraid," Calon said, the wind whipping his cloak. "He thinks you are alone," Julian corrected. He handed Calon a spyglass. "Look to the east." Calon looked. Emerging from the tree line were banners, not of the Empire, but of the disenchanted lords Julian had contacted. 3,000 cavalry, flanking Varys' rear. "You truly are dangerous, Julian," Calon said, a savage grin spreading across his face. "I told you." Julian smiled, slipping his hand into Calon's gauntlet one. "I wasn't easy to break." Calon brought Julian's gloved hand to his lips, kissing the knuckles before drawing his massive greatsword. The metal sang in the frozen air. "Open the gates," Calon roared, his voice carrying over the wind. "Let us show the Emperor his mistake." As the gates groaned open and the Northern Legion poured out like a tide of black ink, Julian watched his general, his partner, his lover, charge into the fray. The joke was on Varys. He had tried to crush 2 dangerous men by forcing them together. Instead, he had forged the very weapon that would end his reign. And that is how the Iron Wolf tamed the scholar, and how the scholar gave the wolf a reason to hunt. If you enjoyed seeing Julian turn the tables and Calon destroy everyone who touched him, annihilate that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a husband who tried to kill you, or would you burn his kingdom down first? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.